Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a virtual pet app. It'll try to simulate a really basic example of like how to um, have a picture of a pet and a few different properties of the pet and a couple different animations for things the pet can do and some ways to interact. So you can see in my example, I have a picture of a cat. Currently doesn't have a name, and there's health and food listed. The food is going down over time, so as the cat gets hungrier and hungrier, um, you might want to feed the cat. So I'm going to click options, and you can see a menu pops up. If I click feed, food goes up and it switches to an animation. It's a really simple animation, just a crudely drawn, terrible picture of a cat with its mouth opening and closing. There's just two pictures there, one with the cat's mouth closed and one with the cat's mouth open. The other option I have is I can click change name, and an entry box shows up, and I could say, not a very creative name for a cat, but you can see when I typed kitty and hit submit, the entry box went away and the name updated to kitty. So those are all the features, and it's very expandable from that point. You can add more options to the options drop menu. You can add different animations for those options. You can have different properties. You can add all kinds of things. But let me show you how to just get the sort of basic pet on a screen and some properties on the screen. And then from there, it's kind of up to you how you want to expand it. So let me create a new project. And you can see from the example that it'll need to have an image for the picture of the pet. It will need to have at least one label. And that thing that was dropped, that Dropbox thing, was a list picker. And I also had a horizontal arrangement that contained a text box and a button, and those only popped up when it was time to enter a name. Otherwise, they were hidden. But I'll leave those there for now. Everything else, I think I'm going to need to add some clocks later, but I'll get to that when we get to timing. That's going to be important for making the animation work. But let's just get started programming it. So I have a bunch of images that I started with, and I'll upload those now. I have my cat sitting image. I have a cat eating one. Cat eating two. And cat dead, that one is if you don't feed the cat, you'll see at the end, if you don't feed the cat, it's a picture of a cat with its eyes crossed out. If you don't forget to feed kitty, or it'll be a sad kitty. So let's just get the initial screen set up first. So in screen, when screen is initialized, what do you want this thing to look like? Well, first that image needs to be set. So let's set image one.picture to cat sitting. And that label needs to be set as well. So this label that's going to contain all the information about the cat, label 1.text, we'll need to combine together a whole bunch of different pieces of information. So that should have a join block. And some of that information will be just labels that you type in, but others will be variables that you're keeping track of. The variables are going to be the name. Actually, this can actually just say name because it will be the pet's name. And then you'll need another for food, and another. I had health on there. I never really did anything with that, but I just want to demonstrate setting up a few different labels. And it's something that you could change over time. Maybe health starts to go down if you don't take the pet to the vet, or health starts to go down if food runs out, then health goes down, instead of food running out and the pet dies right away. But you can sort of modify that to fit your needs. But I just want to demonstrate a few different examples. So I'll need a few more strings here. Because this is going to have name will be none initially, and that's something you can set. Food will be, we'll just have food set to 100% and health set to 100% at first. And then we can reflect that down here. In the label. So name, I'll do colon space so that it's spaced out. I'll set that to name. Food. We'll display food. And health. Display health. I'll give that a minute and see if it connects. In the meantime, another thing that I know I'm going to need is that list picker. The list picker is going to contain, the list picker is that thing that drops down and gives you all those options. So I'm going to go back to my design window, and this text for list picker, I'm going to change that to options. All right, so it says options here, and the list picker, I need to set the list picker elements to be a list of items. So I'll make a list, and I only had 2 items in there. I just had update name and feed. And all this does is place a list of items in the list picker elements list, and that's what the list picker displays when it goes to display a list of things for you to pick. All right, so let's see what happens. Okay, so it's displaying now, and you can see all of the properties are lined up in one line, and they're also kind of small. I'm going to, and also it looks like the name entry is still is displaying. I don't really need that there, so let me take care of those things. First of all, let's make the label font size a lot larger. I'll make that 20. And when this initializes, I'm going to hide this entire horizontal arrangement. The horizontal arrangement contains the name entry. I'm even going to rename it to make it more clear. Name entry arrangement. So that contains all of the stuff related to name entry. And I'm going to turn that visibility to false at the beginning when the app starts. So when the app starts, that doesn't even show. So if I and also still have to take care of the lined up text. I want that to be arranged vertically. But I still kind of only want one label. I don't want to create a bunch of different labels. That becomes really annoying to manage. So instead, I will just put new line characters, which is just a \n for each time I want to start a new line. \n food and \n health. Now if I refresh the screen, I have much larger text, it's lined up top to bottom, and the name entry is gone. Right, so the screen's looking closer to what I want. So let's figure out what happens after you click that list picker, because right now, if you click on the list picker, it shows stuff, and then you can click on something like update name, and nothing happens. It doesn't update the name. There needs to be code that says what happens. So I'm going to click on list picker and list picker after picking. So after you pick something with a list picker, if I'll need an equals sign, if list picker dot selection, that is the thing that you selected, equals update name. So just make sure you just copy it straight from your list because it has to be identical. Whatever is in the list picker elements, that's the item that has to go in here. So if list picker dot selection is that item, what I want to do is make the update name arrangement, my name entry arrangement, I want to make that visible. So set its visibility to true. And once that's visible, you'll have access to the button inside there. So I'm going to go to the button, and when that button is clicked, set the pet's name to whatever is in that text box. And then I have to update the label. I think what I'm going to do is generalize this. So you can see I updated some labels here. And because the labels always just reflect what's stored in the variables, you can just create a generalized update label procedure and just call it every time you need to update a label and not even worry about which label it is. So because I don't want to go in and have to have a bunch of different, like separate labels, they're all one. It's all just one big label with the text combined together with variables. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to create a procedure called update label and put all my labels in there. So at the beginning, when the app initializes, I'm just going to call update label. So instead of putting all this code in here, I'm just putting a procedure in there because now I have this reusable procedure. It's reusable anywhere I want to update the labels. At first, they just get set to the initial values. But then later, when I change the name, I just call update label again, and it updates the labels, including the name label, which will reflect the new name. Also, I'm gonna after the button is clicked, set visibility for that name entry to false so that it goes away. So now, I'm not sure my code is updated yet. Let's find out. If I click update name, the entry box shows up. And if I rename the cat to Fluffy, looks like I need to update my button label here. It changes the cat's name to Fluffy. Now that button didn't have a label, so I'm going to go back to my designer, text for button 1. I'll change that to submit. And for the text box, the hint, I don't really need it. I could say enter a name so that the hint actually makes sense. So now if I click update name, it says enter a name and submit. And when I click submit, it updates the name. So that feature is working well. The next thing needs to be getting the feed feature to work. So when the list picker selection equals feed, that's going to have to do something with a clock actually, because if you know, you might have noticed when I ran the demo at the beginning, that had a simple animation where it switched the picture to a picture of a cat, kind of with its head down as if it's eating out of a bowl or something, and its mouth was opening and closing. So there has to be something that affects the timing, switching pictures from one to the next. So that's going to require a clock. So back in the designer, I'll grab from sensors, a clock. And if you just think about just think ahead to how often the mouth is going to have to open and close. It doesn't have to be that often, but 1 second seems a little slow. I'm going to make it half a second, 500 milliseconds. So it switches pictures every half a second. So what I'll have to do is this clock, I'm going to rename that feed clock because it's controlling what happens when you feed the cat. I'm going to enable timer enabled. I'll enable that timer. I'll just set it to true when you feed the cat. Now that means it should be disabled when the app starts. So I'm going to make sure feed clock timer enabled is false at first. So I'm enabling the timer. Also going to set the food variable to 100, just back to 100%. Now it doesn't actually go down yet, but eventually we're going to have the cat's food go down. So you might as well feed the cat by maxing out the food. So the cat ate a full meal, and this clock, when the clock ticks, it's going to be controlling. It's going to be controlling a counter. The counter is just going to be like counting how many times it switched pictures, because it can't just switch pictures forever. It needs to switch a few times. So I'm also going to need a counter variable. Call this counter. It'll start at 0, and also I'll make sure every time this gets clicked, it gets reset to 0. So every time you feed the cat, this animation counter is going to be set to 0, and you'll see why that matters in just a bit. So okay, let's see what happens when the clock ticks. So the clock doesn't normally tick. This when feed clock.timer, this is only when the clock ticks. It's normally disabled, right? Based on this over here. Feed clock.timer enabled is initially set to false. So when it does tick, that's because it was enabled over here when list picker.selection got set to feed. So when that clock starts ticking, you know it's ticking because you fed the cat, which means we need to switch the pictures. How are we going to switch the pictures? You actually have to do a little bit of math, because when the counter is, it's going to start at 0, and the counter is going to have to tick up. So counter equals counter equals itself plus 1. So counter will count up, but that doesn't really do anything by itself. You have to look at the counter, and if it's an even number, it'll show the closed mouth cat, and if it's an odd number, it'll show the open mouth cat. How can you even tell? There's this math operation called modulo. And what it does is it does some division, and then whatever's left over, the remainder of that division, that's the modulo. It's kind of a weird concept. You might not be familiar with it if you haven't done a lot of programming, but it's actually really common in programming. One of the most useful one of the best uses of it is to figure out even and odd, because if you divide something by 2, right, so divide any number by 2, if there's no remainder, if there's nothing left over, that's an even number. That's what an even number is it's evenly divisible by 2. If there is 1 left over, it's an odd number. So what you can do is you can check and see if the modulo of that counter divided by 2 equals 0 or 1. I'll go with 0. So even number, right? If you take that counter, whatever that counter's on, it could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever that number is in the counter, and divide it by, I messed that up, 2. Okay. Take the counter divided by 2, and then whatever's left over, if it's nothing, it means it's an even number, because there is no remainder, there's nothing left over. It's an even number is evenly divisible by 2. So let's put that inside an if. If the modulo of that counter divided by 2 is 0, then let's set the picture for the cat to cat eating 1. Else, set the picture to cat eating 2. And we'll increment the counter after that. So the counter will start at 0, and 0 mod 2 is 0, so it's going to show cat eating 1. Then it's going to increment the counter. The counter is going to go up. It's going to be 0 plus 1 is 1. The counter goes up. That means it's going to be 2. And 2 is an odd number, so this will be false, and instead it'll switch the picture to cat eating 2. Then the counter will go up again to 2, right? Because 1 plus 1 is 2. And 2 is an even number, so 2 mod 2 is 0. So it'll switch back to picture 1. It'll keep doing that over and over again, even, odd, even, odd, even, odd, until we have to have some condition that makes it stop. So we'll add another if, because it'll do even, odd, over and over again, switching the picture from cat 1 to cat eating 1 to cat eating 2 until something makes it stop. So we'll say if the counter equals 10, so we'll take a number, we'll just have it switch 10 times. So if counter equals 10, let's disable this timer, and it'll stop running the animation, because this whole time the timer is running, it's running an animation. So let's set timer enabled to false. It won't be running the animation anymore, and we can switch the picture of the cat back to a picture of the cat sitting. Okay, that was kind of a lot. Let's refresh the screen and see if it works. So I click Options, I click Feed, switches to a picture of a cat eating. It switches the mouth back and forth for a few times and it's done. So it looks like it works just fine. Now, right now we don't have any good reason to feed the cat because the cat never gets hungry. So that's another thing to add. So let's add another clock. This one will be a hunger clock. So grab another clock. I'm going to rename that clock to hunger clock. And that clock, when that clock ticks, it will set that food variable to go down. Food, we set to food -1. And that timer, let's see what its interval is. Is it 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second? That should be fine for now. I mean, you can tweak that as you see fit, but I think just like ticking down once per second seems reasonable for this demonstration. So I'll leave it alone. And that's not going to change anything though. If you look at this, food doesn't go down because I'm not updating the label. Remember, the label is separate. The label1.text is separate from the variable. It just shows the variable when you update it. So I'm going to call update label, make sure that label updates. All right, looks like my cat's running out of food. Let me feed the cat. All right, so food's back at 99 and starts ticking down again. Now, you shouldn't let your cat run out of food because if your cat starves, the cat will be dead. So let's add if food is less than 1, so food gets down to 0, set image1.picture to cat dead. So now, as the food runs out, the cat picture should switch over to dead cat with crossed out eyes and a sad face. Yep, it does. So this is a pretty forgiving simulation. So if I go back and feed the cat, it's back to life. Zombie cat? Cat with 9 lives? I'm not sure, but it just starts over. So that's all there really is to this basic example. You can see it's very extendable though. You can add more animations, you can add more listings for different properties of the pet. You can add more options to the drop menu. And so you can really extend this and make it into a more full-featured app.